The Dawdler's philosophy.
Snippet. Just a taste.
This is where we should probably slow down and run through this a couple more times. Because the phrase, "this is the idea," was uttered, and then a whole bunch of density followed.
I know.
And we'll pick through it and explain each piece. What's a consumer resource system? Is that what you call it? Dynamic?
I mean, that one is just a system wherein there's a, connection between some resource, which could be, an item in the environment that is, the problem with consumer resource systems is when you try and define one, you kind of have the other one right there. Like, well, it's just,
Because what makes... So, for example, spiders and flies, maybe.
Right, yeah.
The thing that makes the fly characterizable as a resource is the fact that spiders consume them.
Yeah.
So it's like the Niels Bohr complementarity point, right? Two sides of the coin.
Yep.
You're not a consumer unless there's a resource, but the thing isn't a resource unless it's consumed by something.
So it's a really weird, but it seems to me like it's very core part of organisms because it's really important for reproduction and survival that organisms attain the kind of, resources that they require for those activities. They could be resources that you eat and get energy from and that drive all your own processes, but it could also be, a great place to lay eggs or what have you, so it doesn't necessarily have to be just about eating something.
But consumption doesn't mean ingestion.
Right.
It just means utilization.
Right. And so it's really, it also means that like when you consume that thing, it's not really available to anyone else. Suddenly that's sort of the problem for others. And that's why, to some extent, I think there might be a bit of a clustering around resources. But I do want to kind of step through some of the words that I used. Episode, I just think these are events that occur from time to time for various reasons, as opposed to cycling through a period for recurrent ones. So obviously night and day is this cycle, you could say, I'm trying to just draw a distinction between episode, episodic and periodic kind of thing, Then a major change in resources, I'm just saying, is a change that's to a significant degree beyond the average amount and variability of, say, a fluctuating resource. So it's a major change. It's a much different than just the normal, like, oh, it was high today, it was low tomorrow, like the stock or something, stock market or whatever. Synchrony is mostly just from a network perspective that it's called like a local synchronization problem. There's also global synchronization problems. And this is, you can imagine, just some, circuits or whatever in a little network. And how do they, transfer, whatever they're transferring, heat, energy, etc., electrons, whatever. They can globally get in sync. Like people like to talk about synchrony with respect to, like, the fireflies with the emergence property, that the weak emergence or whatever. But these fireflies in Southeast Asia, as well as apparently Tennessee, that all blink at the same time. And that would be like a sort of quote unquote global synchronization or macro synchronization. And then I'm talking about something that, for the most part, I'm saying all you need is a consumer resource connection. And that is sort of this little tiny, simple motif in a network. And so I'm talking about microsynchronization, and this is where the word synchrony is being used.
The things that are being synced up is the consumer and the resource.
Right.
So that when there's an episodic resource change, there will be a synchronized corresponding alteration in the consuming population.
Yes, but the idea being that it also is something where all other connections I'll say all other connections, but many, if not, many very important connections may not have a limiting, regulating effect on them because the resource is so good that you just keep going and growing as a consumer because you just have enough, an abundant amount of resources. And that's the primary thing that locks the two together. And that allows the consumer to kind of not be held down by anybody else.
It frees them from their typical chains of constraint.
Yeah, thank you. I know you were good for something. Anyway, and then net growth. I was saying net growth, and I'm just saying, it's kind of mathematical. It's like if you have the population size tomorrow and the population size today, that difference, it doesn't matter if the population size today was larger than tomorrow or tomorrow is larger than today. It could be a positive or a negative number, if you will, if you're looking at the difference between the sizes. So I'm just trying to say it's a net thing. So trying to make it as universal as possible without having to say growth and decay all the time. It's like it's a net kind of situation. It's a difference, the delta N, that kind of thing. You may not net anything. You may actually be worse for the wear. And then regulating factors are just anything that limits net growth.
What are a couple examples of that in a normal situation? Like starvation or something? If there's not enough flies and they all get eaten, then...
I think net regulating factors are pretty loose. I feel this somewhat similar about resources. It could be competition as a regulating factor, like the idea that, there's a resource and I ate it and you don't get it. Like we're both clamoring for Weller Antique 107 and I grabbed the last bottle and you don't have one, but I do. And it's
surely you were getting that as a gift.
Merry Christmas. But so that's the idea behind, it could be a lot of things. It could also be just sort of, so some of these effects could be density dependent, like there's just too many people clamoring for that Weller, or it could be density independent. And you're just walking along and a fucking tree falls on you. I'm just trying to say these things add, you don't just get to do whatever you want now that you're alive or whatever as an organism. And so these things will have a little bit of an effect one way or the other on the size of the population.
So do you want to repeat it now again after the explication?
Anything that limits net growth?
The whole...
episodic synchrony.
Yeah.
Episodes of major changes in resources can initiate the formation and establishment of populations and variants by controlling the net growth of consumers beyond the influence of all other regulating factors. That is, during or following major episodic changes in resources, consumer populations can diversify upon approaching a new carrying capacity.
Well, again, but in chunks. So, like, say a chunk, and then we'll put it in
that's
English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
Episodes of major changes in resources.
That's a chunk.
Okay, so what? When there's warm weather, so there's a new brood of flies that got born and survived, then normally appear in October in Oregon.
Yeah, something like that. Let's just say.
So that a major change in the resource. There's a whole bunch more food all of a sudden, right?
Let's say yes. What I mean...
he's always like, my examples aren't realistic enough.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they're... what I mean by major is not just like a little blip over a week and a half if you are spiders, but a major change for a week and a half for bacteria might be good. So it's just a relative thing based on...
There needs to be enough generations
kind of
that occur during the resource change for it to show up in the lineage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So it has to be significant in that way.
So instead of it just being hot for a week, there's climate change, and the average temperature goes up a degree.
Yeah.
And then because of that change, now there is every year 2 additional weeks of fly broods than there used to be.
You could say that. Yeah.
Okay.
It probably become more clear with the examples I eventually give.
Yeah.
But
okay, so there's an episode of resource in
major change in resource.
change in the resource. Yeah.
Major, yeah.
And the episode aspect is that this was unpredictable. Is that what differentiates it from the periodic?
I guess it's certainly not something you're like, oh, you're turning into autumn now, or whatever. Yeah, it's not cyclical in the same. Yeah, so it's not something. Yeah.
Okay.
So episodes of major changes in resources
Can initiate the formation and establishment of populations and variants.
What's a population? Too bad we did that already.
I'm going to get too hung up on the can part. Because, I mean, in a stupid sense, well, anything can do anything. But that's not the point. Okay, so... Nice timing.
Just like,
Can initiate the diversification event, the turning the 1 hump into 2 humps.
Yeah. Well, it initiates this possibility, yeah.
It
Barring any
increases
disturbance.
the likelihood of a second hump forming.
It starts the process. Yeah, sure, but to me, and my focus is it's just so long as it begins that process, it doesn't matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter that the likelihood, what you're saying. I'm just saying what I'm mostly trying to get at is that, when you get these pieces all set up, then you are able to start moving forward in this other direction, towards creating more camel humps.
Yeah, the other direction is the new variant becoming established.
Yeah.
Such that it counts as a peak in the graph.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the guy's name.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who?
The guy playing first base.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
What are you asking me for? I don't know.
Episodes of major changes in resources can initiate the formation and establishment of populations and variants
By controlling the net growth of consumers beyond the influence of all other regulating factors.
In other words, or is this close enough to the same thing? This episodic increase in resources can remove or overwhelm the other influences, or remove constraints, but that it supersedes the entirety of the other causes of the current variant distribution.
Yeah, so I probably could change the wording to some extent because I don't want it to seem like you can't have ecological release where maybe the reason why you're exploding is because you're as a population size, it's growing incredibly. So maybe that's because a lot of these regulating factors are suddenly lost or they go away or something like that. And now you have access to all the resources. Yes. But the main idea is that, well, even then there might be other regulating factors. I figure there's no population that doesn't have regulating factors. So even if you remove some, you still are going to bump up against what the other ones were. And so maybe you can continue to grow despite even those. Does that make no sense?
I think it does.
Okay. So I wanted to, it's a tough one. We'll get into some of the other areas of this idea. And maybe that'll start to help clarify it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't, are you good with that? Or do you want me to say that is, and then say the other thing?
I think we're good.
Okay.